Well, good afternoon and welcome to those joining. We're still seeing our participant numbers clicking up. So whilst we're waiting for people to go through the joining process, if anyone out there would like to say hello in the chat function and just introduce yourself, say a little bit about yourself, where you're from. If you want to tell me whereabouts in the country you're broadcasting from, or well, it's not broadcasting, is it? It's kind of you're dialing in from. That'd be great. Good to hear a little bit more about yourselves. And you can tell us if you've got an electric vehicle. Obviously, it's our focus for today. So interested to know what make and model some of you are driving, or if not, what's stopping you perhaps from joining the EV revolution. And I'm sure Fiona's going to be convincing you in the next hour to come that you now should be. So yeah, if you use the chat function, if you want to put anything down, then that's great. I've got sunny Chichester. You can give me a weather report as well if you like. That seems to be traditional in Regen's webinars. Quite nice where I am. I'm broadcasting to the nation from Bath today, and I can look out my window. It's quite sunny, a bit windy. Got a sixth form student there from Mia from Nottingham, an aspiring Tesla owner for the future. Okay, excellent. Good to have goals. Nissan Leaf, thanks, Kate. Okay, yeah, I've got a Leaf, the 30 kilowatt model. I think Fiona used to be a Leaf driver as well.
Yeah, that was my first EV.
First EV, okay.
The old style Nissan Leafs. Very
good. Lockdown South Wales. Yes, sorry to hear that. That's yeah, I suppose I could challenge everyone to explain the current restrictions in place in their locality as well on the chat, but maybe we haven't really got enough time for that.
ID3, that's exciting. I haven't had the pleasure of driving an ID3 yet. They're pretty special. Well done, Richard.
Okay, collected yesterday.
Yeah, I have to send us some more messages on how it's going.
Excellent. We can have a real EV geek out in this session here, Fiona. Can we?
Yeah, it's my life. I love it.
Lovely. Okay, we'll just give people a little bit longer.
Oh, an e-scooter scheme. That's clever. Yeovil. Electric bike.
And 2 electric bikes. Colin, why have you got two electric bikes? Is that a family thing? Is that? I guess that's perfect for the Isle of Wight, isn't it? You're down in Colin, so one for me, one for Pam. Okay, fair enough. Middle of Aberdeenshire. Needs a 4x4 EV there. Not sure how many of those there are out there.
No, not too many yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we're 5 minutes in, so I think let's make a start. We're on about 150 odd participants, so welcome everyone. I'm sure we'll have a few more joining as we get going. And this is, as the intro slide you can all see, this is actually the first of our new green recovery series of webinars. So back in the sort of first half of the year, we were doing a series of webinars we call leaders, some of the leaders in the energy transition. And then the sort of second half of this year, we're looking at particularly the green recovery, and we have a series of events coming up which are listed there on your slide. Many thanks to TLT for sponsoring those, making that possible. And I guess it's a phrase we've all heard, isn't it? Green recovery, build back greener, green industrial revolution. These are sort of becoming, very familiar kind of ambitions, phrases from across the political spectrum in the UK, which is great, of course. And last week, the Prime Minister, maybe it's the week before now, actually, when he made his win speech at the Tory Party conference. Also, if you looked at what was coming out of number 10, there was also a commitment to a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. So this is this is why we're focusing on this area. There's a lot of thinking now about tackling about the importance as we work through, hopefully build back out of the pandemic, in doing that in a low or zero carbon way, that we can't afford the investment we make, the recovery we make to be a high carbon recovery, because we're going to lock in a trajectory there that will stop us addressing the next, if you like, and the arguably much bigger crisis of the climate emergency. So that's our focus, and I'm delighted to start with Fiona Howarth, who is CEO of Octopus Electric Vehicles. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you very much.
Where are you broadcasting from today?
Oh, in London.
London. Is that's the Octopus office? This is presumably with the nice Octopus logo.
Yes. Okay. So you've got some Constantines, as we call our little pink octopus, in the background here.
Constantines. Okay. Excellent.
Yeah. And so for those that don't know, Octopus Electric Vehicles is part of the Octopus Energy Group. So there's a number of different businesses that now make up that group, and we're part of that.
Okay, so a lot of our sessions we've done so far in this kind of series have been more on the sort of regulatory policy, utility side. So this is perhaps our first interview like this, more focused on the business angle. And it's great to start with yourselves and Octopus, because you were singled out by Boris and Richie for a visit a couple of weeks ago as the sort of standard bearer, presumably, of the Build Back Greener agenda. What was that like, having Boris and Richie around your offices? Yeah,
it's fantastic. I mean, I think it's really great that they are recognising the need to build back better and greener, and specifically recognising the need to do it in a smarter way. So a lot of what we were talking about during that visit was around how do we do that in a smart way, and how we as a country can also lead in that energy transition. So as we decarbonise our transport, as we decarbonise our heat, how do we do that in a clever way with smart technology that we can use here, but we could also take overseas?
Okay, so very much in that kind of business angle, jobs angle, opportunity kind of angle. So just tell us a little bit more then, about, just to get us going, about Octopus Electric Vehicles, and within the Octopus umbrella. I think as we were chatting before, you're perhaps, I don't know, one of the first, what they call it, unicorns, kind of, which you can explain to us what that means.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to have to check my definitions, but I believe it means that we have a valuation of over £1 billion. It's a privately owned business with a valuation of over £1 billion, or it could be $1 billion, in fact. But
we won't split hairs.
Either way, I mean, we launched, I think, to the public as an energy supplier in 2016, so 4.5 years ago. So I think in terms of creating a large and exciting business, I think it's been a fantastic journey over the last few years. And now we supply, I think it's about 1.7 million customers. Now I have to tell you that each time I do one of these, I have to go and check, because it's changed and grown over the last few weeks or months. So I could be out by a few thousand, but it's roughly in that region. And we're a green energy supplier, and we've got a tech platform which enables us to offer that in a smart way with great customer service behind it. So we've been recognised by Which over the last 3 years as a recommended energy supplier. And in fact, 2 of those 3 years, the only one. But on the electric vehicle side, we started looking at that market a few years ago, about 3 years ago, and looking at actually how easy was it for people to make that switch to electric vehicles, and how could we help them do that? So as we look to decarbonise the economy, it's not just about the generation of the electricity that's going into our homes, but it's also how we power our vehicles and also how we power our heating. So on the vehicle side, we found it was very difficult for people to make that switch. Actually, I personally went into a dealership to look at a Leaf, and sadly they sent out the new person who gave me a bunch of different information that they didn't really know. They went away to get a brochure, they had to print it out, they came back, we looked together, like, I think that's that colour over there. And I was like, do they know about charging? No, they didn't know about charging. They went to get their boss. The boss came back and told me it was going to take me 28.5 hours to charge, which was just nonsense, by the way. It would never have taken 28, even on my 3-pin plug at home, it wouldn't have taken me even half of that. And so they, and then they turned around and they kind of said, oh, you've got 2 kids. Have you seen the Nissan Qashqai? It's really popular with families. And we've got a great deal on that right now. Would you like to come and have a look? And we found this really disappointing, actually, because if you are somebody that's trying to think about making that switch, where do you go to get information about the cars, about the charging? Questions like, is the battery going to degrade, right? My mobile phone battery after 3 years has problems. Is my electric car battery going to have problems? No, it's not. And here's the data to support it. Or actually, how do I charge it? If I run out of battery on my mobile phone when I'm out and about, well, I can't get that charged easily. So how am I going to charge my car, for example? Like, I don't see charge points everywhere. Well, actually now you are beginning to see charge points everywhere. And actually there's fantastic resources like ZapMap, where you can go online and you can see where they are and you can plan. And there's lots of different ways in which we can help people make that step. But of course, just like a mobile phone, most of the time you'll plug it in at home and start each day with a full charge. And for 70% of drivers, actually, they do have access to off-street parking and they can charge at home and wake up each day with a full charge. And for the most part, that actually suits most people's needs. So actually, when we were thinking about this, we thought, how do we create that organization that can help you make that step, both as an individual driver, but also as a business? So you might have fleet vehicles and things. So we created Octopus electric vehicles. And so we do basically 4 things. 1, we can help you choose your vehicle. 2, we can get great financing for that vehicle, because different funders, different leasing companies might take different views of different vehicles and what they think about electric cars. So we can find good financing. We can help you choose a smart energy tariff, which we've worked hard with the energy team to create energy tariffs designed for electric car drivers. And then also get smart charging to go with it. So those energy tariffs that might have green energy in the middle of the night at low cost prices, actually you don't want to have to wake up at, say, 12:30 at night to plug your car in. And maybe your car might have an app or might not have an app to be able to do it, but actually there's now charging technologies like, say, the OMI cable or the smart charger from EO Charging that actually just optimize it for you and just do it. So actually they will look at the pricing and they will help your car work out when to start charging, when to stop charging, and just while you sleep, they just optimize it against when the prices are cheap. So the car, the financing, the charge, the energy tariff, and then the smart charging to go with it.
Excellent. Okay, so that's the business, and you're obviously, you've picked a growth market, which is great. There aren't many sectors of the economy to be in where the government is actually banning your competition, I guess. So that's great. I was just looking at some figures, and I think in the first 9 months of this year, it was 66,000 battery electric vehicles sold, as opposed to 37,000 for the whole year. And in September, we saw 6.7% total car market share. So how does that reflect your perspective on how fast the transformation to EVs is going?
Yeah, certainly the whole car market is down this year, unsurprisingly. With lockdown, there's been any number of impacts that have had an effect on the market, from dealers having to shut, car plants having to shut, etc. So I think it's down by over 50%, the whole car market. Now, as you say, the EVs are up this year, which is fantastic. And certainly that is very, very positive, but it's still not nearly as fast as we could be going. So actually, if you look at Norway, for example, Norway, it's over 50% of new cars bought are electric vehicles. So actually, compared to your 6% that you just said there, we're really not even scratching the surface, actually, as how fast we could make this transition to clean cars. Okay, so
I was looking at other stats of how fast we might go. The latest future energy scenarios, which we Regen work with quite a lot, and we do distributed future energy scenarios and help the distribution networks think about the future take up to plan the infrastructure for, which we can come back to. So they kind of range between, by 2030, 10% and 33% of all road vehicles will be EVs. That's between about 4 and 13 million on the road. So that's, by then you'd be thinking pretty much all new, at the higher ends, or pretty much all new ones would be EV. But there's obviously a a time to change over the current fleet. So, I mean, that's let's take the higher number of those 13 million EVs by 2030, 10 years. I mean, it's a pretty extraordinary scale of transformation. Is that the kind of thing that you think, you're seeing, you think we can cope with? Or?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it. On the demand side, absolutely. I think that we have customers that are ready to make that shift. As you say, right, we have over 40 million vehicles on the road. We have roughly 100,000-ish pure electric vehicles. It's very, very small percentage of pure electric vehicles compared to the overall number that we have on the road right now. So actually, we've got a huge number of people that are excited about electric vehicles that would like to make that switch. I think over 80% think their next vehicle might be electric. I mean, it's phenomenal. So the demand is there. Then there are questions around range, for example. So the range has got much better on a lot of vehicles. And then infrastructure, there's now over 12,000 places where you can publicly charge your car. That's compared to 8,500 petrol stations. It's phenomenal. And actually, we only hit 8,500 places you could charge your car this time last year. So in the last year, it's almost an extra 50% higher despite lockdown. And that rollout is only continuing, and the government are really behind putting in place more infrastructure too. Not to mention the fact that you can also charge at home, which is what most of us do that have EV.
And I was just going to ask you about that ban. This is the ICE ban, or internal combustion vehicle ban, which is currently 2040, and the government's consulting on bringing forward. When are you? What's your intelligence telling you that that's likely to move to?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there's a lot of momentum towards a 2030 ban, because I think that is really what we like. I think that there's the other side of it, which, there's the demand side, there's the supply side. Mm-hmm. And actually on the supply side, it's really a supply-led market, the vehicles in the vehicle market in this space. So if you think about that dealer that I went into, if I wasn't really committed to making that switch to electric, then actually I probably wouldn't have done. And we actually have quite a lot of examples now where people have gone in and have been put off buying an electric car, so switch to diesel or petrol, which is obviously not what we want. So until we get those car manufacturers bringing into the UK a high volume of electric vehicles and really getting behind it in terms of their marketing and the way that they sell it, and actually, training all of those dealerships on electric vehicles, on charging, on how to help their customers make this transition, until they get really behind that and really invest in it, we're not going to make that switch. So things like that ban, we have to make that a strong ban, and then we need to put in place behind it mechanisms that really tell those car manufacturers that we are serious about this. And actually from 2030, they won't be able to bring petrols and diesels here. In fact, sooner than that. And they need to make sure that they are switching their manufacturing over to electric vehicles, and they are shifting the whole of their sales function as well in the UK.
And that raises the question of, I guess, Estate said this earlier in the interview, mentioned Brexit. I'm sure that what everyone wants to talk about, but some of the dynamic of the way that car manufacturers behave and what vehicles they bring to what market are influenced by all sorts of factors. But the regulatory requirements within the EU to reduce your overall emissions and to have a certain percentage of green of battery vehicles or zero emission vehicles, a big driver in the EU. I mean, we've seen a consultation out from the government about how it's going to bring across those rules into the UK. But I'm wondering how you're seeing that at the moment. Is the UK well placed to be the kind of, follow the Norway model, or is it, does it risk becoming the sort of the dumping ground of Europe for dirty diesels that people are still trying to desperately shift?
Yeah, I think it's really positive that we have seen the results of that consultation and the commitment to bringing in the emissions targets here in the UK. I think that's a really very positive step forward. So that's really fantastic. We did see that Europe also came out at the same time and said that they were going to step up their restrictions and their kind of terms of their emissions targets. So actually we want to make sure that we do keep pace with those, at least, if not even take it further and be even stronger and show real leadership position in terms of those emissions targets. But that's definitely been a really, really strong step forward. I think continuing to push on that and be a real leader in that space and be strong. And this is really important. It's not just important for our decarbonisation strategy as we fight climate change, but also for air pollution. So air pollution, actually, we have 40,000 early deaths in the UK every year due to air pollution. That's like 100 a day. So by today, there's like 50 people that have already died prematurely because of air pollution. The majority of that is driven by road pollution and cars. And so actually we really want to switch over. We haven't had good alternatives for many, many years, right, in terms of being able to switch over, but now we do. And so actually there's no reason why we shouldn't just like turbocharge that switch, and having stronger emissions targets, having that ban, and then things like a zero emission mandate. So there's now talk of, say, backing up a 2030 target with a zero emission mandate, similar to what you might see in California. So what they did is they said a certain percentage of every fleet of vehicles sold by a manufacturer, so X percent has to be zero emission by a certain date, each year. And actually, if they didn't hit that target, then they could buy credits or they could trade them between the different car manufacturers. And so actually you did see an increasing number of electric vehicles specifically to hit some of those targets. And so those kind of mandates as well is another good mechanism that we could bring in here to reiterate our commitment and increase the incentives for car manufacturers to bring EVs here.
Okay, that's great. So we have this transforming industry, huge opportunity. Let's just perhaps step back a little bit and think a bit about the kind of the green recovery, the business opportunity, and how it is to be a business trying to kind of grow and make a living in that, in this sort of green industrial revolution. So obviously Octopus is looking pretty successful there. We've talked about unicorn status, 4.5 years. I mean, what's the we're talking to an audience here, which is a mix of businesses, entrepreneurs, local authorities as well, but quite a lot of people probably involved in the sort of business side, or if not, trying to help other businesses and encourage the green recovery in their locality. So what's the magic ingredient to building a business specifically in the sort of green sectors where I guess there's a lot of consumer interest, there's a lot of rapid change, but it's also very policy dominated, and you're sort of jumping around trying to second guess government policy as well. Can you give us the magic ingredient, Fiona?
The magic ingredient. No pressure, Fiona. I'm not sure if there's a magic ingredient. I can tell you what we focus on, mm-hmm. and what we focus on is the customer. And I think if you focus and moving quickly, and I think if you can find what the customer's looking for, and you can work with the customer to give them what they're looking for, and really think about them and put their needs first, then I think the rest of it falls into place. So let's think about electric vehicles and charging for electric vehicles. So actually, what do people want? People want to be able to have reliable charging, green energy at affordable rates. So actually, I want to know that when I go home and I plug in, I want to have reliable charging, and I know that when I wake up tomorrow, I'm going to be able to drive away with whatever percentage of charge I've been targeting in my car. So often EV drivers might not charge to 100%, because actually for the health of battery, we often charge up to 80%. And that's what we recommend. And so actually, for example, I knew that I wanted to leave this morning with 80% battery in my vehicle. And actually, so I want to know that whatever I plug into, I'm going to be able to leave in the morning with 80% charge. And so actually, to be able to do that, I don't mind what time, by the way, when I get home. I don't mind if it's straight away. I don't mind if it's 1 o'clock in the morning or if it's 5, even as long as it's reliably charged for when I leave. That's all that matters to me. And so actually to do that, then we can get affordable green energy in the middle of the night when it's cheapest. In fact, whenever the wind is blowing, you can match up that wind generation to when I consume. And then I know that I'm getting green energy at low cost prices. Mm-hmm. And actually we saw over the weekend on our Agile tariff. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the Octopus energy tariffs for EV drivers, here's a quick, we've got 2 of them, quick insight. So one of them is Octopus Go. Octopus Go has a standard peak, it's a very affordable rate during the day. And then at 12:30, it drops to 5p per kilowatt hour for 4 hours. which is roughly a bit more than we think EV drivers need every night, but gives you a bit longer. 4 hours, 12:30, 4:30, and then it jumps back up and it's got its normal tariff. So that period of 5p per kilowatt hour is around about a third of what you'll see on the standard rate, and even less than what you might get on a Big Six standard variable tariff, which is fantastic. And then the other tariff that we've got is Octopus Agile. Octopus Agile doesn't give you a set price every day like Go does. Go is very reliable as to what price it's going to be, but Agile reflects the price of the wholesale market. So actually what you see in the wholesale market is that it's low overnight, there's a small peak at breakfast, and then there's a big peak between 4 and 7 p.m. And in fact, there's other network prices that are also more expensive between those hours of 4 and 7 p.m. So the price jumps up. So you end up with that small peak in the morning and then a much bigger peak between 4 and 7. Now, actually, what happens sometimes is we have an oversupply of electrons onto our grid, and so particularly green electrons. So there might be a lot of wind blowing in the middle of the night. We're not awake, we're not consuming that electricity, and sometimes we're literally paying those wind turbines to not generate electricity. And we're saying, don't do that. Let's pay our EV drivers to charge up. And actually, you see, because the wholesale market is literally going negative at that point, so our Agile tariff goes negative. So at the weekend, on I think it was Saturday night, the Agile price dropped to minus 8p per kilowatt hour for a half an hour period. And I think the next half an hour period was minus 6p per kilowatt hour. So I think one of our customers on Twitter was saying that they were going to get about 90p for charging up their car overnight on Saturday night, which is quite cool. So actually we're using those green electrons, so we're taking them, we're putting them into the grid, and then people are charging up with them.
Excellent. I'd love to come back a little bit more to that, to the kind of the charging of the car bit and the grid. Just quickly, for those want to contribute, you can use the chat to carry on throwing in comments and thoughts. If you have questions, put them into the Q&A function. We're not going to have to sort of take them all, but I can keep an eye on those and see what sort of things, and Fiona, I think, can have a look at them as well, see what sort of things people are asking. So, but just come back on finishing off, if you like, on the kind of business side of things, because we are, as a country, when we talk about green industrial revolution, we talk about building back greener. We're kind of betting the future of our economy post pandemic on this is the huge opportunity, lots of jobs. So you've illustrated how you've gotten about that. Any other sort of tips or thoughts as to working in this space, particularly? Obviously, green recovery covers a huge amount of areas, but just kind of working particularly in an area that's all about environmental goals and policy. Anything else that strikes you as what we're going to need to do if we're going to be successful?
From a green recovery perspective,
yeah, from a business, if we're going to create these millions of new jobs, and everyone currently doing whatever they're no longer, Rishi tells us there's no longer viable or whatever, is going to have to go off and find these new green jobs. I don't know how many Octopus employed. Did I see a figure of 1,000 or so? So that's some jobs.
Actually, over the next couple of years. I think as you look at the as we decarbonize our economy, as you look at kind of some of the key areas are, of course, the power sector, which, to be honest, I can say this now as I specialize in EVs. The power sector is phenomenal. We've decarbonized already. We've reduced emissions by 60% since 1990 levels, which is amazing. That's absolutely brilliant. And really, the energy sector has led the way. In terms of transportation, we've reduced carbon emissions by 3%. I mean, it's negligible. So there is a huge amount to do there in terms of emissions. And actually, if you think about the fuel that we import all the time, so all the petrol and diesel that we power up our vehicles with all the time, that's all imported. And all of the generation of that, it's not really generation, it's capturing and managing it and bringing it to the UK. All of that supply chain is overseas. And so actually, if you think about renewable energy powering our vehicles, that renewable energy can be homegrown renewable energy. So actually, that generation and the grid to support it, and a smart grid to support it, which we can also talk about a bit later, the smart grid to support that green transformation, all of that has to change and develop as we switch away from a kind of oil-based transportation sector to a renewable-based transportation sector. And
Okay.
then the next step on from that, of course, is heat. So
Okay.
Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt, but yeah, a lot of opportunities there. I mean, a lot of this is dependent on government policy driving demand or shifting incentives, or whether it might be regulations or taxes or bans or all sorts of things. And so just trying to build a business when you're kind of trying to second guess or understand or see the latest government policy machinations. How do you guys cope with that?
Do you know what? I think that the government can help us turbocharge this space, but consumers are going to do it anyway. Consumers, I don't think, want to be driving around in petrols or diesels, contributing to carbon emissions into our environment. I don't think they do want to be having large emissions pumping out next to schools. And actually, the electric cars are great. So they're, the acceleration is fantastic. They've got loads of tech on them. They're just really great cars. So I think there's a consumer push that will happen anyway.
So does that say that the fundamental, if you're trying to build a business in this space, you don't really want to build it based on a government policy? You want to build it on a fundamental kind of dry, consumer demand, something that's got value and is going to be in demand, where almost whatever the government's doing.
That's it. So I think the consumer demand is there, and consumers want to make that shift. And so I think the shift is happening. I don't think there's any real debate. It might speed up or slow down a bit over the next few years in terms of how quickly we make that transition, but it is going to happen. And so actually I would, a rising tide kind of lifts all ships. I would just join us and let's all make this happen.
Excellent. Okay, good inspiring words. So Fiona, you talked a bit about that fuel supply chain moving, and it's worth just reflecting that whole, as you put it, supply chain of oil tankers from Qatar through the Straits of Hormuz or whatever to refineries to petrol stations. We're talking about taking that in the whole kind of huge energy kind of supply chain and shifting it all into electric. Does that, and you guys talked about there about how you're helping that. Is it going to cope? I guess is one question. Or how much of an issue do you see that as making sure the UK's energy network infrastructure is ready for that kind of scale of energy demand that's being shifted from that kind of supply chain in the electricity system? Yeah,
I don't worry that we are going to be ready. I think what I want to make sure that, or what I do think about, is whether or not we're doing it as smart as we can. So I think about 3 years ago, there was a report that came out that showed that we could save up to 40 billion by 2050 by doing it in a smart way. And for the infrastructure for the grid, making it smart for the grid. So actually, let's take your numbers that you had earlier. So I think you said by 2030, we might have anywhere between 4 million and 13 million electric vehicles. Let's take a round number of 10, just for ease of calculations. So a home charger typically charges up at 7 kilowatts. 7 kilowatts. And we've got 10 million vehicles. Let's say they all went home and they all plugged in at exactly the same time. That would be 10 million vehicles charging at 7 kilowatts. That's 70 gigawatts. Now, the peak consumption in the UK is around about 62 gigawatts. I'm sure there's some other people on the chat that will be able to get me exact numbers, but roughly around about the 62 gigawatts. So therefore, if we add on 70 at the same time at that peak time, that's a much higher demand on generation as well as the grid. And for us to have, say, idling fuel, like fossil fuel powered power stations idle so that they could ramp up just for peak time so that they can like support our electric cars, doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. But instead, what we should be doing is having more renewable generation, which by nature is more intermittent, and we should recognize the need of the side of that. But actually with that, we also can consume energy in the cars at whatever time is appropriate to match that renewable generation. So it's just a very different way of thinking. It's not a let's ramp up our generation to match our demand. Now there is this generation, now let's consume and fill up at that point. So let's have smart charging. And we could even go further if we wanted to in terms of things like vehicle to grid, which is where you can store that energy in the battery in the car, and then you can release it back to the grid at peak times to support the grid if needed.
One of I think everyone would agree with the smart charging approach. I think the figures of that National Grid have projected is it's probably an extra about 10 gig of demand is what they're expecting to see if you add up the total amount of energy that would be required to get those EVs around. So that, but of course that may not be evenly spread. It may be at peak time, and it may be at very local levels. One of the Regen team can probably put a link to the work we've done with SSEN, where we did granular street level projections of EV take up for them to start planning their where they needed to upgrade their low voltage infrastructure to cope when, rather than the sort of the overall scale. And I guess one question that a lot of people have debated in this around smart, and you're starting to get some data on this, is, how much are people going to care about saving a few, earning 90p. I mean, I've just spent 70 grand on my shiny Tesla. I just want it.
Congratulations.
I haven't, Let's imagine. I've got my second-hand lease actually, but let's imagine I just gone out and spent 70 grand on my shiny Tesla. Am I really going to give a monkeys about, the fact that I've earned 90p, one evening, or do I just want it charged when I need it, and I don't want any fuss, and I don't want to wait, have an emergency sometime and find it's not charged, or similar. So yeah, there's been quite a lot of debate, I guess, about will that smart charging signals really work, or will customers just say, just give me an all-in price and I want it charged, I don't really want to think about it beyond that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things on that one. One is, we see it a lot like the plastic bag tax, essentially, right? So it's like 5 pence. And so before the plastic bag tax was brought in, like 5 pence, who's going to change their behavior for 5p for a plastic bag? And actually overnight, 95% reduction in plastic bag usage, phenomenal. And actually, so then you apply that to energy, and you have things like that Go tariff, for example. That Go tariff is very simple. It's like those 4 hours at 5p per kilowatt hour. And it's very easy for people to understand and predict, and actually start to realize that they can save 90% of what they're spending on petrol or diesel by switching to an electric car with Go. That's pretty cool. And actually then we make it super easy. So obviously at 12:30, I don't want to wake up and go plug in. So I get the Omi cable, the EO charger, for example, that we talked about earlier, and then it's just simple and it's just done for you. So actually then you just get in a routine, you plug in when you get home, but then it optimizes the charging for you. So actually you don't have to try, you don't even have to remember to take plastic bags with you. It just happens. And the same with the Agile tariff then, it's all kind of optimized for you. The Omi cable, for example, just does it all. And actually what we found is that people start to engage in it in a different way. So actually, if you have a petrol or a diesel car, you can probably tell me what the price is per litre of that fuel at your local pump. I remember I used to drive around my very first car. I remember it was like about 88p. That probably dates me. And I remember when it went out to 89p, and I knew it exactly off by heart. What's interesting is we're seeing that people are starting to engage with kilowatt hours now instead. So actually it's 5p per kilowatt hour. Oh, did you see that actually on Agile, I managed to get minus 8p per kilowatt hour? Or they start to understand that actually to drive to their grandparents, to fill up, it might be £3, or to drive to my parents is going to cost me £2.50 instead of £25 that it would have cost me in petrol before. And people are starting to think about this as a different kind of metric, and starting to engage in energy in a completely different way. So I think just in terms of the results, you said it earlier, we've started to get some data. So the first cohort of Agile customers, so obviously there's a mix of EV drivers and non-EV drivers. So the overall cohort, that peak period between 4 and 7 p.m, which when we most want to encourage people not to consume during that peak period and shift their behavior if they can to a different time, the overall cohort reduced their consumption during that peak period by 28%. So they shifted that out of the peak. the EV drivers, their absolute peak dropped by 47%. And actually, if you would like more detail on this, if you go to the Agile report, Octopus Energy Agile report, all the data's in there, or if you can't find it, drop me a note on LinkedIn and I'll get you the link to the report. But so all the data's in there, and we've published that. And actually we've taken it further. So there are some, you talked earlier about DNOs and the importance of some of that local upgrade work. Actually, what we're saying as well is that, you know, these customers are willing to change their behaviors. So don't assume that they're not going to, and go and put in infrastructure, or even further put in mechanisms where you can say switch off their or throttle their energy supply because of infrastructure needs. Actually, let's just make sure that we have that smart charging and the pricing signals to be able to unlock that flexibility. And actually, so what we're working with UK Power Networks on two different things. One is a shift trial, and the second one is some vehicle to grid work.
So I was just going to pick up, in fact, there's some of the questions coming up on vehicle to grid and how much. I mean, you know, there've been various ideas, dreams, whatever you like to call it, of 20 million EVs out there. They're going to be, you know, the backup system of the future, and they're all going to be parked out. And when the wind doesn't blow, it's all right because the EVs just put the power back in. Others have been a little bit more doubtful that by the time you've paid for that power to come, you know, retail costs, put it into your car, brought it back again, lost some of the power, that's going to be some pretty pricey electricity there in terms of selling it back to the grid, and in terms of the technology. Do you guys have a position on that, or is this, do you think, very much still in trial stage? And then,
yeah, so I think there's still definitely potential for vehicle to grid. I think there's a couple of things to be considered. One is, I mean, I'm less worried about the cost of those electrons. So I think we'll get to a place where, you know, marginal electrons will be negligible in price, right? So we'll have the wind will be blowing, and we've already made the investment in the turbines and everything. And so actually the extra electrons that come down the line at that point where there's surplus, actually let's just save them, and then we can use them to power back. I think that the biggest challenges with vehicle to grid are twofold. One at the minute. One is the DNO pricing signals, which we briefly touched on a minute ago. And the second one is the cost of the chargers. So when we have a grant from Innovate UK, and so we're doing one of the Innovate UK demonstration projects actually in vehicle to grid, a large scale domestic one. And when we started doing this about 3 years ago, the chargers, the first charger we found on the market was about 6 foot tall, and it's like a telephone box, and you had to stick 2 feet of concrete, and it cost £10,000. The next one was up to waist height. We didn't have to sit 2 feet of concrete anymore, but it was waist height. It looked a bit like an air conditioning unit and cost £9,000. And actually, the economics for £9,000 and this somewhat less attractive charger don't really stack up. And now we have the wall box charger, which isn't £9,000 anymore, is somewhere between what we need it to be and the £9,000. And that's much smaller, it's lighter, it's in fact it's the world's smallest, lightest vehicle to grid charger for domestic use. And it only needs one person to install it and all that kind of stuff. It's just fantastic, and it has come down in price significantly. But for it to be economical, we need it to be about £1,000 or £2,000. And we're not there yet. And so actually we need to get these chargers to a place that where they will be affordable. And the third bit, which I think will come, is that currently today vehicle to grid only works with CHAdeMO, the CHAdeMO connector, which is available on the Nissan Leaf and the Ian V200, which is a van. And so actually it's not available on, say, your Tesla, it wouldn't be available on a Renault Zoe, it wouldn't be available on Honda E, any number of other exciting vehicles like the ID3, so Richard with his ID3, we won't be able to do vehicle to grid with those cars. So actually what we need is CCS, which is the connector which is used on the charging technology which is used on these vehicles. We need CCS to be enabled for vehicle to grid. And I think there are standards that are being pushed through and that development work that's in progress, but the reality is that's at least 2 years away. Okay,
we talked a bit about charging, and you highlighted the number of chargers out there, and I know you guys are trying to do some work to make those easier. I mean, as you know, I've done quite a lot of longish distance driving on my quite short range Leaf, and so I had quite some intimate experience of the charging network, and whilst it's definitely getting a lot better, it is still pretty patchy, and the you do end up with 9 apps and and different payment cards and quite a lot of time on the phone to people asking why their EV charger doesn't work. So do you feel that is going, are we going to have a simple, easy customer experience for charging when we're out and about?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for the majority of our drivers at this stage, I think we said earlier, most of the people are charging at home. But yeah, sometimes you have to make longer journeys. So I also have been to Scotland and back in my EV and Cornwall and back in my EV within the last few months. So know what you're referring to in personal experience too. I think a couple of things. One is we always recommend to our customers ABC, always be charging. So actually, if you are stopping to have a break and there's a charger there, top up, do it. We stopped, and there was a council somewhere in the Cotswolds that we stopped to have some tea with our kids, and we just plugged into a charger that was there, and that council very kindly actually gave us free electricity through the Polar network, and it was super easy, and it just topped us up and meant that we didn't have to stop again on the way home. But actually, even if all motorway service stations, you'll be familiar, do have ecotricity chargers or others, and actually, as you all know, they aren't always consistently working, which is to your point, I think. And so actually what we say is don't rely on that one definitely being working. Don't wait until the last minute to charge your car, just top up every time you stop. There's the next step that I say is that actually we've recently launched the electric juice network. So we've already been supplying green electrons to a number of the charging networks, but over the last few weeks, we've now launched a card, essentially, where a number of those networks have become part of a group where you can take a single Octopus energy card, an electric juice card, and you can use that card at any of these networks that have joined already. I think there's 5 or 6, including Ingenie, who have recently rebranded, I think, as Osprey, Chargy, Plug and Go, and a few others, Franklin. And actually you can take that single card, use it, and actually it will charge it back to your energy bill. And you can be an Octopus Energy customer or not. So you could even be a EDF customer and you can still register for one of these electric juice cards, and you will get a single bill essentially for all of that charging on those different networks. And so that's our first step into almost having a roaming type facility where you don't have to have 9 apps on your phone, as you were alluding to, Merlin, and starting to simplify that easier and have transparency about overpricing, etc. And I know others in the market are doing it too. We're not the only ones.
We are. When you see a transformation of the scale, and of course we've seen it. You referred earlier to renewables and the what's the Boris had said something about wind turbines couldn't rip the skin off a rice pudding or something, and then used his speech the other day to sort of eat his words. So for those of us working in that space, we're very familiar as these transformations come through for people who are not so keen. And I guess once we start to see that ban coming forward to 2030 to something that people can really start to see, I think there's going to be some people who aren't so keen on that and are going to make their views known, I'm sure. And I guess 2 of the areas of kind of challenge that have been coming in is, one is they've been about supply chain, and one is about the total carbon life cycle. I saw you tweeting about that the other day, so you'd be pleased to know I've been following your tweets. They're getting out there. And secondly, the supply chain issues in terms of cobalt mining in certain parts of the world. And Regen also runs the electricity storage network, which is the sort of association of large battery companies in this country, and has a working group on some of those ESG issues in the supply chain. So I guess it's a number of questions are wrapped up in that. Is how much of a backlist do you think we might see, and how much do you think there's some truth somewhere in those kind of lines of challenge or attack that we might see?
With changes like this, there are certainly people that will not want it to happen. We will see some challenge and we will see some pushback, and I anticipate we will see more coverage of these kind of topics that you're alluding to. And I think it's really important that we as a community and as an industry get out correct information out there. So I think in terms of the emissions generated, so I think for a country like the UK, if you just take our average energy mix, in terms of our generation mix, the savings from switching from a petrol and diesel to an electric vehicle over the whole lifetime is about 30% saving. Now, for countries where it's much higher renewable, low carbon generation, it's a 70% saving. So actually, if you're powering your car with renewable electrons, so if you've got a green energy tariff, for example, or just generally as we decarbonize that power sector further, then that's a 70% saving those overall emissions. So it's definitely worth doing. And then of course, it also shifts where those emissions are and hits the air pollution challenge that we were talking about earlier. And just in general, in terms of the challenge that we're going to get, I don't think that anyone can argue about those 40,000 early deaths. I think we've already seen how far we'll go to limit early deaths from other things like COVID, and we've obviously made huge changes and sacrifices in our lifestyle for that. And actually, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to make some changes with our cars, actually, even better cars that are more fun to drive, to help, take on that challenge from air pollution. The other things that you mentioned were things like cobalt, and then obviously there's other things around recycling and things like that as well. So obviously this is relatively early in the development cycle. If you think we've been developing petrol and diesel cars for over 100 years, these are still relatively in their development cycle. Actually, already Tesla have said that they don't plan to have cobalt in their next iteration of batteries design, which they're anticipating in the next 2 or 3 years. And they've also said that they expect their batteries from second-hand vehicles that then come off the road, instead of them being recycled in other contexts, they actually expect those batteries to be recycled into more car batteries. So actually, those materials will be taken and will be recycled and reused in car batteries. You've got to remember the car manufacturers themselves are on the hook for finding solutions for those car batteries. But actually, I'm sure what you'll have seen as well is those car batteries are being taken into propositions for home batteries or other stationary battery solutions, because actually they've still got a lot of life in them, even if they aren't suitable for transportation.
Okay, so I think a message from all this, important that we are on the front foot on these issues. As we're coming towards the end, I thought a good opportunity to get some feedback from our audience. We've still got about 150 people listening, so we haven't managed to put them off in 50 minutes chat about EVs, so well, that's great. So we had 2 polls. Let's start with what people think is the key priority to enable this kind of take up of EVs. We came up with some things that we picked out. So I'm afraid it's just a list that we brainstormed. No doubt you might think there's others, and there's another button there, but just interesting to see what our esteemed audience, the wisdom of the crowds, thinks as what's the top electricity system priority to enable the rapid take-up of EV. So we focused in on that, on the electricity system issue, rather than perhaps supply of cars, etc. for this particular question. Got quite a lot of options there. Just give people a minute or two. I imagine everyone's pretty good at voting on these things now, pretty used to Zoom and polls and the like, so won't give you too long. Okay. Hannah, are you happy to launch the results? Okay, so pretty clear victor there, Fiona. And I think that's probably what I expected when we wrote those down. I mean, I think you said 70% of people could charge off street. I mean, the exact number might be debatable, but there's a good chunk of people, and people in places like London, Manchester, wherever.
Drivers, I think it's
who can't.
60% of homes off street parking, but actually with people that actually drive, it's a high percentage. So
if we're actually banning people buying a petrol car, then we're going to have to give them a chance to charge, to be able to charge. Do we have a solution to that? Does Octopus have a solution to that?
A number of the charging operators that we work with, so a lot of our partner networks have options. So actually Chargy, which is one of the ones that I mentioned earlier, have clever curbside charging technology. A number of them have Lamppost charging. We're seeing lamppost charging be rolled out by a number of local authorities, for example. So literally, if you don't have an off-street parking, you might just pull up at home and plug into that lamppost next to you. Other people are just charging up at work, for example. A lot of workplaces are starting to enable charging at work, and we'll see a lot of other innovation actually around that. What's really interesting is that as soon as you have demand, then you people find solutions. People just, that's naturally what happens. So while we have very few number of vehicles on the road, so bear in mind we were talking earlier, roughly around about 100,000 pure electric cars compared to 40 million vehicles on the road. So actually, as soon as we start to see that increase, people will naturally want to be offering alternative solutions to that, right? And we know that local authorities want to support that, and so they're already rolling out a number of projects and chargers everywhere. So I don't think that's as much of a worry at all as people think it might be.
Okay, and our final poll was to ask when people expect that they will be driving a battery electric vehicle. You have the "it already is" option, obviously, and then a couple of other options in the near future, bit longer term, or you really think that this is miles away and you're quite happy in your very large diesel car and you don't want to think about this until the 2030s.
Merlin, while we're waiting for people to respond on that survey, I think this audience typically are quite smart when it comes to energy, and a number of you might be familiar with Vehicle to Grid. We are looking at the minute for more people to participate in our Power Loop project, the Innovate UK Vehicle to Grid project. So if anyone is interested or might know of groups of people that might like to learn more about the Power Loop project, we're doing webinars with certain industry groups and partners and things like that, specifically on that Vehicle to Grid technology. So if any of your audience is interested, please do get in touch. Excellent,
thank you. Good advert out there too. You can either come through Regen or go direct to Fiona's LinkedIn profile. Okay, let's have the results of that, shall we? Okay, so we've got about 20% of this audience that are EV, battery EV drivers, another quarter expecting to be very soon, another quarter 3 to 4 years. So quite a few who are still seeing it quite a long way away, even in an audience like this, which is kind of interesting. Okay, we are, I'm afraid, coming towards the end. I mean, I think I could carry on chatting about EVs happily for ages. I was quite interested in exploring a little bit, thinking a bit about how we make sure this is a smart and fair transition as well, and whether you know, all these wonderful, if you've got the money for an EV and for solar panels, you can optimize your electricity tariff and pay the minimum amount, but those that don't perhaps have the capital for those kind of bits of kit might end up paying more if they can't be smart and things. So I think that there's that's another area it'd be good to explore when we get another chance.
Yeah, I think the key one for a chat, but we don't end up investing loads in infrastructure that we don't need because we don't have the smarts, and then everyone has to pay more. And actually what we do find is that with those households where they are offered different times in which they consume energy, I think we'll find that they also will be able to take advantage of lower cost energy all round, and at those off-peak times as well.
Excellent. Okay, so that might be an area worthy some more discussion. Regen has an EV and electricity system forum, which will be continuing to discuss some of these things. But I think really it only remains this beeping in the background from my computer is probably telling me that we've come to an end. It's 2 o'clock bang on. So really only remains me to thank you very much, Fiona, for participating. It's been great to do this kind of green recovery interview with our first green tech unicorn business in the UK. So congratulations to everyone at Octopus involved in that. I won't try and sum up the issues, but you know, it's interesting to see just how much is involved in a transformation of this kind of scale, but also the kind of excitement and interest and entrepreneurship and new solutions coming forward. I think perhaps give us all a great deal of hope and optimism for the future. So many thanks, Fiona, participating, and thank you very much, everyone, for participating, and lots of comments and chat in the chat and the Q&A. So lots of interesting stuff shared there as well. So thank you very much all for your participation. As my colleague, as we flagged up at the beginning with the slide, we've got a series of these interviews coming up. So do book in for the others that are of particular interest to yourself. And I think finally, just to well, as I say, when we used to do live events, I'd wish you all a safe journey home, but wish you all a safe journey to the kitchen for a nice cup of tea. Thank you for your participation. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you.
Bye.